let's talk about this, like Biden and Saudi Arabia with their mutual defense pact. I mean, that's basically what that's a function of.
Yeah, I mean, it's being presented as, Israeli-Saudi normalization, and there is some element of that. But most of the details that have been reported thus far seem like this is a, in my view, a U.S.-Saudi pact that is being is receiving a thin layer of varnish about peace with Israel that's being used to sell it in Congress and domestically, because a defense pact with a government like Saudi Arabia by itself would be much, much more difficult, if not impossible, to pass.
Iran. What is happening on? I mean, we just had a unfreeze $6 billion worth of assets for the release of 5 prisoners. Six prisoners?
Was it 5? Yeah, I think it was originally 4, and then there was, at the last minute, they added a fifth, I believe.
Is that an indication that maybe there is or does that help get to a resumption of the nuke deal, or where are we in that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the JCPOA as it was is no longer operative, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is there's just zero trust on the part of the Iranians. And also the sunset.
How could they?
How could they exactly? And that
because there's I don't know what the odds are, but Donald Trump could be president in 16 months,
exactly.
And then they'd be back to where they were.
Right. And again, this is an area where I've been pretty critical of the administration. There were a few promises that Biden made on foreign policy that were as unequivocal about rejoining the Iranian nuclear agreement, and then they came into office and they just slow walked it in a way that a lot of us found confounding. And I think from the Iranians' perspective, they were kind of waiting to see, okay, this guy was just elected. Can we trust him to keep his promises? And what he showed them was, well, maybe not. Right. And once you've spoiled that, and that's not to say we would have absolutely been able to get back into the deal had they moved sooner, but that we'll never know. And we are where we are now, which is essentially a deal that is no longer going to work.
Is the hostage exchange a sign that talks may be getting closer? That was some of what I saw in terms of prognostications on the internet.
Yeah, anytime
Yes,
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No. Anytime you have, any kind of negotiation like this, I think, and you do have some kind of trust established. The question is always, can you expand that into other issues? And it's possible, but again, we are in a spot now where I think if there's going to be a deal, it's going to be some much smaller nuclear deal. The Iranian program and their enrichment has continued. They have a much larger stockpile. So, in my view, I think the JCPOA as it was an extraordinary deal. Even despite the criticism you saw from the right, but I think the criticism you saw from the right was not of the deal itself. It's just that they didn't want to make a deal with Iran.
Right. They wanted it to be all-encompassing, but the terms of the deal as Obama entered were, we're going to limit it to nuclear proliferation, and then maybe that deal becomes the building block for something else in the future.
Right.
What about Biden seeing Netanyahu? I mean, this is... it seems to me it's so much more, it would be so much easier now for Biden to say, with all this stuff going on with your so-called judicial reform, you have, half your country is protesting on every other weekend.
For months, it's amazing.
We can't see you in this instance because the entire premise, and I don't frankly buy this anymore, but you're the only democracy in the region, which, first off, I'm not even sure that we care. Why would we care? That doesn't inhibit our relations with anybody else whatsoever. You're the only democracy in the region. Therefore, we don't have to forgive you assassinating somebody on soil, although I'm sure we do that anyways. We do forgive them. We don't even raise it as an issue. We're in favor of who they assassinate more often than not, I guess. But why isn't he taking this opportunity, or is it just like there's just too many? The Biden administration feels like if they could just have one foreign policy issue for the entire administration, they would have been fine with that.
Right.
They just seem to want to sweep as much under the rug as possible.
Right. I mean, there's a few things going on here. One is, as I said before, it's the lens of strategic competition, which is to say that this relationship, and it is a longstanding and very deep and multifaceted security relationship with Israel. So it becomes even more important. You also have, as you said, I think, in general, in terms of foreign policy, they just don't want to talk about foreign policy. They don't want to fight about foreign policy. They want to expend the minimum amount of political capital arguing about foreign policy or getting into fights about foreign policy that's possible, and especially on an issue like Israel, which is, controversial and tough, as we all know. They just don't want to get drawn into this stuff. And lastly, it's Biden himself, kind of ideologically. I mean, he has a view of Israel. I think he's made it clear multiple times. That is, I guess I'll kind of kindly call it vintage.
Right.
That's incredibly kind.
Yes. And he has a view of an Israel that once existed, if it ever did.
He was a senator during the Yom Kippur War, I think.
Right.
That was in '73.
And he has a longstanding relationship with Netanyahu too. And Biden is someone for whom personal relationships matter a lot. For good and for bad. So that's what got us where we are. But again, the cost here is that they have expended almost no energy on Palestinian rights. They have essentially turned a blind eye and continued blanket diplomatic support for Israel at the UN in the face of an extremely aggressive annexationist agenda in Israel right now. And again, I think this is going to come back. There are going to be very bad consequences for this.
Do you think where is the Democratic caucus in this regard? Because it felt like there was some progress being made when Tim Kaine and I don't know, a couple others boycotted Netanyahu's visit to Congress. In part because it was, I think it was Boehner at the time who had invited, or maybe it was Ryan. I can't remember who.
It was Boehner.
Invited him just to try and show up Obama, But I took that as a pretty good sign that someone as sort of like middle of the road, like Tim Kaine, would be in a position. And it just seems like this is even lower hanging fruit now because of this stuff that's, their authoritarianism in the occupied territories is sort of like come home to roost, to borrow a phrase from Reverend Wright. Is there anybody in Congress who's like sort of like pursuing the beyond Bernie?
I mean, there's Bernie. There's Van Hollen, who I think has been a real champ on this in terms of the relationship, but also particularly on Palestinian rights. On Shireen Abu Akleh, he's been very vocal in pushing. Frankly, he should not have to expend this much energy pressuring a U.S. administration to investigate the murder of a U.S. citizen, but he has championed that. And obviously, you have an increasing number of folks over in the House side. Rashid Tlaib, of course, the Squad, but more than the Squad, people like Buchan and others. So I would say the debate has shifted. Now, when does that become evident in policy? That's the real question. I think we've certainly seen a sort of reaction from groups like AIPAC, who, they understand that the debate is shifting, and they want to stop that. And the way they're trying to stop that is by pumping tens of millions of dollars into primaries.
Democratic primaries.
Of Republican money, often.
Yeah.